All right, hi everyone. I'm Nicole Peterson, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us for our SMA speaker session entitled Algorithms of Armageddon, What Happens When We Insert AI into Our Military Weapon Systems. And I'd also like to thank today's speakers, Captain George Galdorisi and Captain Sam Tangredi, for taking the time to present today. So just a few quick housekeeping items before we begin. So we'll be having a Q&A session at the conclusion of the session. So during the briefing portion or during the Q&A, feel free to submit your questions through the live event Q&A chat. It's a chat icon and it has 2 overlapping speech bubbles and 1 is a question mark. Also be sure to click on the, or to type in your name and affiliation before you submit your question, or if you prefer for your name to be anonymous and not on the record, you can submit your questions anonymously. You can also hit the like button next to the questions that you'd like to be addressed most first, and we will go ahead and do that during the Q&A. So I'm going to briefly introduce today's speakers before turning the floor over to them. George Galdorisi is the Director of Strategic Assessments and Technical Futures for the Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific. Prior to joining NIWC Pacific, he completed a 30-year career as a naval aviator, culminating in 14 years of consecutive experience as Executive Officer, Commanding Officer, Commodore, and Chief of Staff. He began his writing career in 1978 with an article in U.S. Naval Institute Proceedings and has since written 14 books, including his most recent nonfiction project, the forthcoming AI at War, How Big Data, Artificial Intelligence, and Machine Learning Are Changing Naval Warfare. We also have Sam Tangredi, who's the Lidos Chair of Future Warfare Studies and a professor of Naval, National, and Maritime Strategy at the U.S. Naval War College. He served a 30-year naval career as a surface warfare officer and a strategic planner and a leader of strategic planning. And he's also the author of Anti-Axis Warfare, Counting A2AD Strategies. So Captain Galdorisi, I'll turn the floor over to you to begin, and I will stop sharing my slides.
Okay, thanks so much, Nicole, for that very kind introduction. Sam and I have been collaborating on these thoughts for quite a while, and it's my turn to brief today. So Sam and I will both be there for the Q&A, and we trust that you'll ask Sam all the hard questions, and I'll take the softball ones. But we really appreciate, Nicole, you and Todd and the whole SMA team giving us a forum to share our views. And we really had 3 goals today for this. The first one clearly is to stop talking before you all stop listening. The second one is to leave you mildly dissatisfied. And we say that because in the half hour for the brief and the half hour for Q&A that we have, we can't possibly deep dive into this subject as much as we'd like to. So we provided Nicole and Todd and their team with a paper that goes into more depth and granularity, and also has citations for many of the things that we allege in our brief. And then the third thing is we hope not to get thrown out of the room. And I say that because this is the strategic multi-layer assessment, and we've listened to many of the briefers before, and they touch on strategic level things. We're going to talk about technology, but we think you'll see during the course of the brief that while these technologies won't change the nature of warfare, they'll certainly change the way wars are fought. And
George, I'm sorry to interrupt. We haven't gotten your slides yet and don't have your video. Yes, okay, your slides are here now.
Terrific. Okay, I think they retreated when you put your slides up. So anyway, just rounding out the introduction. We hope not to get kicked out of the room, but we do hope that by sharing what we feel that big data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning can do for military weapon systems, you'll come up with an understanding that they can change the way wars are fought and actually the character of warfare. So if we all are in the same room together and we put up this slide, we'd ask for a show of hands of who this gentleman is, and someone would identify him as Simon Sinek. He's the number 3 TED Talk ranked person in 2020, and the reason he is because he wrote this book, Starting with Why. So particularly for this group, and particularly when you hear from technology people who sometimes gravitate right to talking about their pet rock in scientific terms. I thought it's just important to remind ourselves why we're doing what we're doing, and what the SMA group is trying to help establish. So it's pretty popular to do a bottom line up front when you're giving a briefing, and I think the point is that we recognize there are many emerging technologies that can profoundly impact warfare today, tomorrow, and well into the future. And we're just focused on one of these. This isn't to say that the other technologies aren't important, but it is to say that this is something we've done a deep dive into. And we think by briefing this group, we can help instigate collaborative efforts to insert big data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning into our platform systems, sensors, and weapons. So you can't hear from folks in military organizations without a little bit of an outline. So we will just toggle through these 7 bullets today, and again, finish up on time and leave plenty of time for Q&A. And again, as I mentioned at the outset, I'm coming at this as technologist because we really do believe that technology can change the way wars are fought. Having said that, though, and one of the quotes in Max Boot's book is by British General Fuller, we're not all in as much as General Fuller is, who believes that technology is 99% of victory. But I think the point that he makes is that technology is hugely important. Of course, that's a point that Max Boot makes throughout his book. So just taking a very high-level strategic perspective, national defense strategy makes it pretty clear that the United States and its allies can't win just by showing up. And if you remember only one graphic in the brief, I'd invite your attention to this one. This is something that generated in November of 2015 when then Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter spoke at the Reagan Defense Summit right up the road from where I am in San Diego in the Simi Valley. And this was a radical departure from our strategic perspective over decades. Right after World War II, it was the Cold War. It was the U.S. and its NATO allies against the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. We were deadly worried about the Warsaw Pact pushing 350 divisions through the Fulda Gap, and that was the singular focus. And anything else that we had to address, the term of art was a lesser included subset of preparing for that battle. Then the Soviet Union imploded. We were the unipower, and then, as you know, 9/11, the global war on terror, became the one thing we worried about. And what Secretary Carter was pointing out is that now it's a much more nuanced issue. It started out as a 4+1, 4 contingencies, 1 condition. That's morphed into a 2+3, recognizing that we have 2 peer adversaries. And for those of you familiar with the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, their report makes it quite clear that the country who wins the AI competition will be positioned to win a much bigger strategic game. And again, that's not just one speech by Secretary Carter. This idea of peer competitors, as most of you know, has been instantiated in our national defense strategy. So you say that's a pretty dire situation. What's the U.S. DoD response? And the DoD some years ago came up with something called the third offset strategy. Part of the reason they did this is because of the challenges we face. The very recent Director of National Intelligence Global Trends Report talks about the cascading global challenges that the U.S. needs to deal with. So if you say third offset strategy, it begs the question, what were the first 2? And again, very briefly, in the 50s, worried about the Warsaw Pact crushing through the Fulda Gap, we came up with a new look strategy, which included nuclear weapons and tactical nuclear weapons. Our adversaries finally caught up by the 70s, and we came up with a new offset strategy, which included precision strike, ISR networking, and those sorts of advanced technologies. That sustained us for a while. We never did take on the Soviet Union using those, but we took on a Soviet-trained and Soviet-equipped army in Iraq in Desert Storm, and you all know the results. Eventually, our adversaries caught up, and we came up with the third offset strategy and defense innovation initiative. Again, you can't hear from folks in military organizations without some Greek architecture. So this really is the third offset strategy in the Defense Innovation Initiative, and it's built on 5 pillars. And as I populate this, you see what they are. The last 4 pillars aren't talked about that much today, but the first one is technology. And when you peel the onion and you go through the Defense Innovation Initiative and get to the long-range research and development plan, the focus is on human-machine teaming, as you see here. And I'll just go around the clock and briefly talk about the aspects of this. Most of you recognize this as the game of Go. And when AlphaGo beat the Chinese chess Go champion, China in their open media said this was a Sputnik moment for us. Human-machine collaboration goes on in some of our platforms already. This is a Joint Strike Fighter, which my fighter friends in the Navy and Air Force call a flying server farm, and it is. The Army is very advanced with assisted human operations. We'll talk more about human-machine combat teaming in the cases of the Navy Triton UAV and the P-8 aircraft, as well as the H-60 aircraft and the Fire Scout, and then network-enabled systems are having Tomahawk missiles do things they couldn't do in the past. So that brings us to what we can do and why we want to do it, inserting big data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning into our weapon systems. If you wonder if this has traction, this is the recent testimony of our Deputy Secretary of Defense identifying AI and autonomy as important priorities for the Department of Defense. So human-machine teaming is a term that's thrown around a lot, but maybe not understood. So I just wanted to deep dive into that a second, talking about the human on the left, the brain, and the computer on the right, and what that means. And again, that National Security Commission final report is very blunt in saying that if we don't adopt AI into our military systems, we most certainly will lose the next war. So the way we want to explain this is by using pictures, and many of you recognize this picture. It's a very famous picture from World War II. General Eisenhower speaking to the soldiers of the 101st Airborne on June 5th, 1944, the day before they jumped into Normandy. And the reason he's talking with these soldiers is that he was told by Air Marshal Lee Mallory that the 101st would suffer 80% casualties. So with that as a starting point, people who are all in on the military robotics revolution and think this is the greatest thing and it's leaping forward, this is their view of the future. Again, it's General Eisenhower speaking to robots that he's going to send into battle, and that way we won't lose any soldiers, sailors, airmen, or Marines in the fight. People who are intensely worried about AI into military weapon systems, this is their view of the future. The robot commander commanding soldiers, and that's clearly an untenable situation. But in the Q&A, we're happy to discuss how these kinds of things are already happening in our society. But again, the Goldilocks solution, not too hot, not too cold, but just right, envisions General Eisenhower speaking to the soldiers and their robot partners. And look how artfully this picture's done. It's not the robots on one side and the soldiers on the other, but rather it's each soldier with his robot partner. So again, that's our way of explaining what man-machine teaming is. For all of us operating in the DoD space, particularly those who are very zealous or very desirous of getting AI into our weapon systems now, we feel it's really important to understand how concerned the American public is about the DoD having killer robots and perhaps losing control of their killer robots. And so we wanted to start out with this quote from a movie that we think everyone has likely seen or at least knows about. And it was a very prescient movie over half a century ago that talked about what a robot could do. And now remember, HAL wasn't a bad robot. We're not talking about Terminator. We're talking about a good robot gone bad. But these are the kinds of things that the American public has been fed. So whether it's 2001: A Space Odyssey, or Her, where a man gets totally enraptured by his cell phone, or more recently the movie Ex Machina, where a computer programmer wins a prize and is asked to give a Turing test to a cyborg, happens to be an attractive actress, Alyssa Vikander. And without giving away the movie, the cyborg eventually seduces him and helps her escape, and he dies in the process. So again, these are the kinds of things the public's being fed, but it's not just movies. It's articles in some high-end journals. I think many of you probably read the Economist, and several years ago, this article was put in there talking about what happens if machines are carrying out orders autonomously. In a similar way, in the New York Times, Bill Keller, talking about smart drones, teed up the idea of the president making a decision to kill a combatant, but that momentum is going on to propel us to the day when we cede that same lethal authority to a machine. And we can talk about that more in the Q&A. But again, these are the kinds of things the public's being fed. Well, you say, well, that's, kind of the intelligentsia, the policy people. What about the technical people? What about the people who build these algorithms? Surely they get it and they're not concerned. Well, they really are. Alex Garland, the director of Ex Machina, was interviewed, and he called out three icons in the tech industry who are, as you see here with this quote, hugely concerned about what happens when we insert AI into our weapon system. So again, just offering these as an example that the bar is very high for us in DoD if we do want to insert these technologies in a weapon system. So bringing this down to the operational level, what Sam and I want to do is offer two cases, one unmanned systems and one a more universal case, as examples of the kinds of things, the specific things we can do with AI and machine learning to make our weapon systems better. General Shanahan, the founding director of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, teed up three missions that he felt AI could be useful for. We picked the one that's the most operational in our mind, the Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance mission. And we'll go through that, but again, particularly for those of you in industry, this was our former Pacific Fleet Commander, Admiral Scott Swift. I actually heard him say this exact same quote in two other venues, and when he used this quote, he said when people come into his office, whether they're industry people, acquisition people, R&D people, and he asked them to describe his operational environment, his exact words were, they are slack-jawed. They can't do it. So for all of us in this space, if we can't describe the operational environment, we're at a loss. And again, as Navy people, we're using a Navy example as the operational environment. This happens to be 3 carrier strike groups off the coast of South Korea in 2017. Why were they there? Because North Korea was doing threatening things. So continuing with this example of the carrier strike group, and I work at NIWC Pacific, as Nicole teed this up. We're in the C4ISR business, and just to break that acronym down for you, it's command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. But we think this is a perfect metaphor to describe what kinds of things unmanned systems and AI-powered unmanned systems can do. So if you think about it, what the carrier strike group commander or any commander on the ground in the Army case or in the Air Force case wants to know about, they want to know what's ahead of the group, and that's the ISR portion in C4ISR. That information has to be communicated back to the strike group. That's the communications part. Then the commander has to make a decision, and all this is undergirded by computers. So that's really breaking down the acronym for you. So we tee all that up that way, really, as a way to talk about what unmanned systems can do if they're empowered with AI and machine learning. So this is a picture of the Triton. As an aviator, I'd usually put this up in the air, flying through the clouds, looking really great, but I put it on the ground here for a purpose. If you see that little figure in front of the left wing, that's the lineman. So this unmanned aerial system is a beast. It weighs as much as a Hornet fighter aircraft. So when it goes out on an ISR mission, the way this plays out today is the operator sits in a windowless room in Jacksonville, Florida. The aircraft is flown out of Guam, soon to be flown out of Japan. And what the operator looks at is endless hours of empty ocean. And the operator gets tired, and the operator gets bored, and the operator can miss things. And from our view, this is a perfect example of where we can use AI and machine learning in the Triton to do some of the things you see here. It can tell the operator that, hey, I found a ship, and then say the ship is in a normal shipping channel or not, correlate the automatic identification information, etc. And again, we cover this in much more detail in the paper, so I'll breeze through these slides very quickly. So once the Triton does find something and help identify it and solidify it, then it has to communicate this information back to the flagship in a very busy EW environment. It can't just do that willy-nilly. It needs to do some of the things you see here. And again, those are things perfectly suited to the AI and machine learning algorithms that can be built today. Again, once on the flagship, the commander has to make a decision, and AI can assist with that in giving him or her well curated and processed information. If we're talking about lethal unmanned systems, the bar is much higher. The way this would play out is again, an operator in a windowless room in Creech Air Force Base has been following a terrorist for a week perhaps, and watching the terrorist interact with his family. And at some point, he's talking to the National Military Command Center or even the White House Situation Room, and they're asking the operator, what is your level of certainty? And again, this is where AI and machine learning can give that level of certainty or uncertainty to make the right kind of decision. So while we feel that's an important aspect of what we can do with AI and machine learning, I think a more universal case is better decision making. And the reason we picked this is exactly what General Shanahan is sharing with us here, is that this is his opinion, and we hold that opinion as well, of what AI can do for the whole United States Department of Defense and US military. A way of getting at this is to go back a little ways. For those of you with Air Force background, you'll recognize this as Colonel John Boyd, who was a fighter pilot in the Korean War and came up with, when the US was not doing well against Soviet MiGs, he came up with something called the OODA loop. This is the textbook picture of it: observe, orient, decide, and act. And the point is, if you can get inside the enemy's OODA loop, you'll win every time. Bringing this down to a Navy example, when our Chief of Naval Operations spoke at the Naval War College Current Strategy Forum, he pointed out that the Navy has been chasing all four aspects of this OODA loop for many years. And we've gotten very good at observe, and we've gotten very good at act, but not so good at orient and decide. And the CNO's point was, it wasn't because people are lazy or stupid, is the technologies literally did not exist to do much about the orient and decide aspects of it, but they do today, and that's where the Navy is focused with its investments. So to bring this down to an even more universal level, decision making is something that warfighters must contend with at all levels. And we wanted to take this back many years to popular fiction. Some of you may remember this 1965 movie, The Bedford Incident, but it was the first popular movie that talked about decision making under stress in warfighting. And the way the fictional story went, which by the way was loosely based on US ship, Navy ship, and Soviet submarine encounters during the Cold War, is the USS Bedford is chasing a Soviet submarine. This is going on for days. It's getting more intense and more stressful by the minute. The captain is hugely aggressive, even running over the diesel submarine snorkel. And at some point in this chase, someone asked the captain if he's going to fire at the Soviet submarine, and his words are, "No, but if he fires one, I'll fire one." Well, a tired ensign is under stress, thinks that's the captain's order to fire one. He fires an anti-submarine rocket, which destroys the sub, but not before it fires a nuclear torpedo and sinks USS Bedford. So while that's fiction, it was eerily prescient of something that happened 55 years later in January of last year. As many of you know, the Iran Revolutionary Guard missile battery shot down a Ukrainian airliner and killed 176 people. And the reason this happened was 5 days after President Trump ordered the killing of Iranian Revolutionary Guard General Soleimani. The Iranians have just fired ballistic missiles at the U.S. base in Iraq, and they were fearing a cruise missile retaliation. And the missile battery commander didn't have a good picture, and he couldn't communicate with higher authority, and this tragedy ensued. So it'd be easy to dismiss those as, well, that's one fictional thing and one of a country that doesn't have the advanced capabilities of the United States. But here is just a sampling of some tragedies that occurred because U.S. warfighters didn't have the right information to make an informed decision. Now, we're not going to throw chum in the water and tell you that the only reason these things happened was because these systems weren't populated with AI and machine learning. But clearly, in every case, there was data on those platforms that could have been curated, processed, analyzed, and displayed to help the warfighter make a better decision. So, again, just some examples. If you're counting, the totality of fatalities in these incidents was 382 human lives. So that brings us to really our last bullet of what we can do in this SMA community to ensure that our warfighters can outthink our adversaries. And again, going back to General Shanahan, he makes the point that we want to bake AI into our systems, not add it as an afterthought, as sometimes happens in the acquisition world. So some suggestions of what we in the SMA community can do. First is we recognize there are important corporate training, maintenance, and other military challenges that can benefit from big data, AI, and machine learning. But our point is that our warfighters need these technologies today to address operational challenges. So that's where our focus should be. The Jake director suggests going after the low-hanging fruit, some of the examples that we gave, particularly with the Triton. And we think there's no more propitious time to collaborate on that, and that the SMA community can lead this effort. I also wanted to point out, for those of you that wanted to collaborate with our lab, is that we have an enormous stake in unmanned systems and big data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. We've been doing this for quite a long time, in both in ground, air, surface, and subsurface unmanned systems. This just gives you some idea of the scope of our work. Again, not being the public affairs officer for the lab, but we have partnerships with other entities, particularly industry, to develop these systems. And again, we don't build the systems, the platforms themselves. We're putting the C4ISR assets into them to try to make them smarter. Just to pause to say that it's easy to say, well, let's just go do it, like Nike would say. But it's important to realize that AI hasn't been on a continuously ascending path. We had an AI winter, actually 2 AI winters between the mid-60s and the mid-90s, where no work was going on. Why? Because this technology had been tremendously overhyped, and the companies that built the algorithms had hugely overpromised and underdelivered, and so AI didn't just slow to a halt; it fell off a cliff. Picked up again in the late 90s, but again, there were hiccups along the way. Some of you might know about the Tay chatbot there, the second to the last bullet on the back, on the bottom. That was Microsoft's attempt to create a friendly chatbot, but Tay was putting such scandalous things on Twitter, the entire program ended in 16 hours. So really kind of continue the conversation. I'm looking forward to your questions. We look at inserting AI into military weapons systems, very analogous to the U.S. Navy nuclear power program. For those of you who aren't dialed into that history, the first nuclear submarine was USS Nautilus, was launched in 1954. That was only 9 years after the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And there was a huge public concern about putting nuclear reactors in the water underneath the ocean. But the Navy powered through that, and you all know the results. We don't feel, and I don't feel particularly as working in a technical organization, that we can engineer out all potential ethical issues when inserting these technologies in a weapon system. So there will be a human in the loop, or at least on the loop, when we use lethal systems. And we feel that of all the things we can do with AI and machine learning, helping warfighters make better decisions faster with fewer people and fewer mistakes is the key to success. This is not a trivial challenge, and we think it's important to have an ongoing conversation on this subject. And again, tripping back into popular culture, We use this quote because it's something that's important to recognize when we ask military people to use AI-enabled weapon systems. They have to be able to see inside the black box. They're not going to trust it unless they know what's going on. And again, this is a huge reason for DARPA's explainable AI program. When you watch a PBS show, very often they say, well, if you like the show, you may want to read about it. Sam and I did a book that Nicole was kind enough to mention in the outset. We gathered over 24 experts in the field, both from a policy and technologically and an ethical standpoint, and talked about how we would do this in the future. And with that, we thank you again for letting us share our views, and Sam and I would be happy to take your questions.
All right, thank you, Captain Galdorisi. Go ahead and make sure that your video is on for the Q&A. But otherwise, we will move on to the Q&A portion of the team session. So feel free to keep submitting your questions through the live event Q&A chat. All right, so our first question is from Keith Ofshowitz. And this question is of equal or greater importance. What is our adversaries doing with AI/machine learning? If we approach our use of technology wrong with respect to our adversaries, then we'll be out of the OODA loop. So Sam or George, would you like to take that one?
Sam, do you want to lead with that? You've done the most research in this area.
Oh,
oops, you're muted. While Sam's coming off mute, I'll start by saying that
and George, we still can't see your video.
Yeah, I'm Nicole. I'm mashing the the camera, but we're not having a lot of success here.
You may need to stop sharing your screen to be able to come back and share your video.
Okay.
We apologize for the technical difficulties, everyone. All right, your screen sharing is off, so you should be able to toggle your video off and on.
Whoops, I got to reverse that.
Okay, and Sam, you're here now.
Yeah, no, thanks. Not going to dodge that question, but I do want to explain something about adversary AI. And we've taken a look. This book is pretty comprehensive look at various aspects. And on one chapter that I did the chapter on AI programs of potential opponents. And the three major AI powers all have different incentives on how they're going to put the AI into their systems. Going through the research that's been done on the PRC and AI, it seems to be that their focus is to use AI to be able to transmit decisions from the highest levels down to the tactical level. And in fact, the decisions of the mid-level officers would be replaced by AI support for the high level. And the reason is because you're talking about a surveillance and counterintelligence state, authoritarian state, that is always concerned about how it's not only just its population, but how its military decision makers are going to support decisions made at the party level and at the highest level. So their application to AI is different than ours. I wouldn't say it's a human in a loop. I would say it's kind of a certain humans in the loop situation. So what that is important is because in understanding how they're trying to utilize it for their own OODA loop, they too have some potential weaknesses in the way that they're approaching. Now, Russia is a different case. Russia is trying to use its AI to basically replace manpower. Once they broke up as the Soviet Union, they lost a great deal of military manpower. They cannot match either the US or China in that category as far as trained manpower. So they're mostly looking at AI to be used in autonomous systems, particularly land combat systems. And in that case, you really are going to the spot of not having anybody in the loop for those. So the three, while we focus on primarily on advisory and decision-making aids, as well as back office kind of functions, our potential opponents are looking at vastly different. So when we talk about the OODA loop, all three have different OODA loops. Can China get inside our OODA loop? Yes, and that's something that we in the book talk a great deal about, and that's deception. And here's my view on that. I know I'm on a tangent, but this is an important point. And I'll preface it by saying George and I are neither technology hype people, nor we are absolute skeptics. We're kind of practicalists, which is what you saw when he is talking about the case of the recommendations for Triton. You know, look, how can we utilize this? But we also realize that AI has been grossly overhyped, and it's not a condiment that you sprinkle on top of things. You have to decide how best to use it within the program. And so, looking at your question on the OODA loop, there are limits to what we can do. Deception is a big factor. Can nefarious actors get inside our actual algorithms? And yes. And the problem is Silicon Valley doesn't realize that, because their use of information assumes that information is true. And we have to assume that information might be false. And so it's hard to take what has already been done and apply it to war-fighting decision-making aids, because you have to add that component. You have to teach the AI that it may be wrong, because what it's getting from the sensors may be wrong. And that's a whole different prospect. And I know the intelligence community's equivalent to DARPA, IARPA, is looking at that now, because I've had dialogue with them. But up till now, there have been assumptions. Secretary of Defenses have gone out to the Silicon Valley and say, you're going to save us. No, they aren't at the point that they can handle some of these things. Now they can handle something like, I mean, we point out, George did not talk about Operation Maven, or Project Maven rather, which is very similar to what we're recommending for the Triton, helping the Triton. That did not end well at the time for DoD. There's a lot of problems with that. Hope I asked your question. I kind of steered it in a different direction, but now I'll shut up.
No worries, thank you. George, did you have any comments before we moved on to the next question?
No, I think Sam covered it. So let's keep rolling.
Okay, great. All right. So this next question is from Benton Enomoto, and the question is: how do you see AI ethics impacting the speed of delivery of AI-enabled systems, where in the day-to-day use of the system, you see AI ethics helping or hurting employment? Will the soldier, sailor, marine, airman, guardian that's using the system know how the AI system was developed and trained, and understand what the bounds of the AI-enabled applications, recommendations, and actions it takes are? So a little bit of a mouthful, but hopefully you caught that.
Yes. George, let me tackle this. In the book, and we're not selling the book, we would give you all free copies if we could, if I could convince the Naval War College Foundation to do that, but I haven't yet. But to answer your question, one of my colleagues, Nina Collars, has done a chapter of the book exactly on that. Nina's background is she studied innovation during wartime, and particularly how warfighters used innovative systems in the Vietnam War. And her conclusions are, if the warfighter does not know how the system works and does not feel that they have some meaningful input to the decisions that are making, they have a tendency to drop it and break it because they can't trust decisions that they don't have an understanding in. So when we put AI in all the systems, it's got to be very not simply transparent, but in the scenario she looks at and talks about, what has to happen is that the user needs to believe that they have some input into the decisions being made, that they are using a tool that's working with them. And that's why George emphasized human-machine teaming. It's not simply a machine going to give a recommendation. It's also a question of the user being able to tell the machine, I like your recommendation, but here's another factor, or understanding where the recommendation comes from. So, and integrating AI into any system, what has to be done is there has to be a feature for humans to input information into that process. And if they don't have that, if it's just a black box or they have no participation, in Nina's scenario, she has the particular patrol gathering information in this village. The leader says, well, you know, we should just put this AI enabled laptop on this dog and let it walk around the village for all that we're doing. And so that's going to be a factor. So your question is a very valid one. The question is, how do we do that? And engineering's hard. We haven't quite figured this out yet. And it's going to take a lot, and it's going to take a lot more money than a lot of our decisions makers thinks it's going to, a lot more resources. Thanks.
Yeah, and if I could pile on to that, to what Sam said and what Nina revealed in our book, earlier this year, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Berger, spoke at a national security and AI conference, and he talked about just this issue of man-machine teaming and trust. That he said they Marines gave a very simple AI-enabled system to a group of young Marines and said, "This is your system, and it does these great things. Go use it." And gave a similar system to another group of young Marines, but said, "This is your system. You need to train it, and then it will do these things for you." And he said, you know, you could finish the sentence, which group of Marines actually used that system. And to this point of man-machine teaming, these are friends of ours, so we're not hawking their book, but Peter Singer and August Toll, who got quite famous for a book called Ghost Fleet, have a more recent book called Burn In, which is not a overseas military adventure novel, but something domestic. And the entire book revolves around a female law enforcement officer training her robot assistant, and that's why it's called burning in the system, meaning giving it time to be trained and actually be useful. So again, popular fiction is dealing with the same sorts of issues that the DoD is grappling with. Hope that helps.
That does. Thank you both. All right, so this next question was submitted via email from a member of the SMA community. And this question is, if we think that the Chinese have an advantage in AI and AI is easy to deceive, where are programs for a red team focused on deceiving PLA AI in ways that advantage us and our black hats that are looking for efforts to deceive our AI?
Well, let me talk about a little bit on that. I am assured, you know, what we've worked on in our study is open sources and unclassified sources. I have been assured in many opportunities that we're actually looking at that and red teaming on that at some higher level. Having not participated in that, participated in other red teams, but not on AI, I can't assure you of that. And in fact, maybe I can kind of scare you a little bit. Taking a look at the natural flow of AI development and all the advantages that the Chinese Communist Party has over us in developing it, it is natural for China to be the AI leader. It's got to be the AI leader. There's got to be a time where the equation is reversed and we're going to be the fast follower. How that affects our view of the human in the loop, I don't know, but it is kind of a scary prospect. Now, why do I say they're going to be the leader? First of all, their population is 4 times the size of ours, which means theoretically they could produce 4 times the number of engineers and scientists. They obviously envision a future of that. But also, more importantly, since the government could pick AI winners and losers in the commercial sector, they can force those companies to provide military applications to whatever AI they're working on. I mean, if you don't, you're not going to be a winner. In contrast, we have Google employees who basically shut down the Project Maven work. Obviously, that can't happen in the PRC. They're going to get squashed. So there's a great advantage in that. There's a great advantage in the being able to control the domestic commercial AI production to support military applications. Now, Russia can't do it to that great extent, although the commercial commercial environment is controlled by what formerly were called oligarchs, but now they're mostly directors of state-owned enterprises, because gradually Russia is building its way towards that. And they could really compel a lot of that, but not to the extent that the PRC can. So my fear, and I think the reality is there's going to be a certain level that we're going to be the fast follower and they're going to be the developer. What we do in that situation, I don't know. I've been thinking about it. I've been thinking about this red team issue. But on the unclassified level, we haven't had much discussion on it, simply because, we haven't got to that point yet. I'm sure that DOD is thinking about that, but I'm sure that DOD is thinking about lots of things. And so hope that answers your question. It doesn't answer your question, but that's kind of our perspective.
All right. Thank you, Sam. So this next question comes from Brian Fajan, and the question is: data is the key for AI. The DoD's data architecture and security concerns, need to know, etc., is built on siloed data sources. How do you see the DoD breaking down these silos and/or the culture?
Okay, I'll start off on that again. The problem is not all that cultural. It's a question of labeling the data so that you can cross-correlate the data. Now, the problem is over the last decades, when we've applied software to our problem solving and we created this data, much of the data that's available in their groupings aren't designed to work with data in a different format. So the initial challenge is trying to format that data into a way that it can actually be cross-correlated. That costs money. And we haven't been, the reason it's not happening is not simply cultural, because we all think in stovepipes, but also because over time we labeled, that's the current term, we didn't use that term in the past, but we labeled data in a way that fit a particular system for a particular purpose, for a particular service. And now we have to go back and somehow be able to make that data cross-correlate. And That's going to cost time, effort, money, data scientists to have to be involved to curate the data. It's not an easy prospect. Just because we could think of these, that's the thing that's frustrated me in the working on AI is because we can think of things that AI can do doesn't mean that it's easy to do. And that's why in George's brief, he focused on what things that we thought are relatively easy to do because they've kind of been proven, particularly the Triton example. You're taking basically what Project Maven did, and now we're going to apply it not simply to intelligence analysis being done in an intelligence center, but we're going to apply it to an operational system that we're using to provide some real-time intelligence. So this stuff is hard, and people often don't realize the amount of effort and resources that really is going to take in getting that data so that they can actually be used together. Now, let me tell you about a little experiment we did at the Naval War College. We wanted to get some of the Silicon Valley folks to help us in creating kind of a decision-making platform that could be useful for the operational commander giving advice. Well, we're not working with the staff, so what do we do? Well, let's get something that can do that for students at the Naval War College, and we try to say, okay, perspective of war, maybe a system that can correlate perspectives of war. So basically, we're trying to train it on Clausewitz, Mahan, and Sun Tzu. And just couldn't be done because those three authorities define war differently. So when you even look at the word war, what was coming up were different definitions. The programming couldn't correlate what the three authorities were talking about in a way that could come up with some sort of actual conclusion based on looking through how many times the word war was used in their writings, what tactics or techniques or advice they were using on warfighting and stuff. It could be done. It was too tough, and it was too tough because the people doing it didn't have their own understanding of war, and someone needed to be in the loop to actually do the actual curation of that, and that cost that made the project very expensive. And we see that too with also the successes AI had. DeepMind did not win the IGO game simply because they had a good algorithm and then it played itself. First, they hired Go masters to train it. So really it wasn't so much a system beating a Go master as far as all the Go masters they hired to train a system to basically duplicate what they could do without having to use the restroom or having to think about something else, and instead of being able to hold 1,000 opening moves, it could hold 100,000 opening moves in its memory. So we forget that this stuff is hard and it requires a lot of human intervention, and it's not just something you pull off the shelf. Unless you're doing it for a back office function, you're saying, well, we're going to rectify how we pay service members, then probably there's something to pull off. Anyway, hope that answered something.
All right, thank you, Sam. George, did you have any comments?
I'd like to just defer because I know there's a limited time and there are more questions. So I think Sam gave a great answer.
Okay, perfect. We also have a little bit of extra time to go over with extra questions. If you both still have extra time to stay on. I know we have about 6 more, at least in the queue right now.
I'm happy to hang in.
Perfect.
Me too, yeah.
Okay. All right, so this next question then comes from Bob Elder. And the question is, has the USN used AI or machine learning successfully to detect faulty information or purposeful misinformation?
Not To my knowledge, Sam may have a more well-nuanced view of that.
Really, we're in the infancy of that. There may be black programs that the Navy supported that I don't know of, but we really haven't. But AI is a continuum. In the book, I use the term simple AI to mean autonomous or automatic processes. So in a way, the Navy is very familiar with that because we have the systems like Aegis or CWIS where you could put it in autonomous mode and it's going to act like a human in the fact that it makes a decision. Now, when AI, the term was first coined, and you ask, what is it? The scientists were defining it as a system that can make a decision that was previously reserved for humans. And they looked at two particular functions, which was natural language processing and also visual recognition. And those are the two areas that AI has advanced the most in. But the Navy is in its infancy, but is it predisposed to be able to use this? We think so because we have used automated processes. Now, CWIS is not a learning system. It cannot teach it itself. It has to go by the rule set that it's given. But it is making a decision in an autonomous mode because it is detecting, engaging, deciding to shoot, all that. So this is not an unfamiliar thing. It's just we haven't advanced to the point where we're baking in the AI programs into the AI into the programs yet. To agree, you do that in the J35. Again, AI is a spectrum, and what we're talking about are two pieces that we think are going to bring it to a bigger level in a reasonable format. Instead of telling you that AI is going to, like Putin does, AI is going to rule the world. Well, no, it's not going to rule the world. Here are some practical military applications that we think could be used. So to answer your question, we're not really. I don't know of any programs that have success yet, and I think we need to have success. My advice to the services is that we focus on one particular program, Triton perhaps, or whatever, and we demonstrate a success in using AI, and that will encourage other program managers and PEOs and everybody else to say, hey, this might help me achieve the objectives set for this program. And since there hasn't been a big success thus far, Maven might have been, but since it hasn't occurred, we haven't generated the momentum. And yes, you have the Jake, and the Jake's going around trying to encourage people to do that. But we haven't had a major success that really could demonstrate it. So hope that answers your question.
All right, thank you. This next question comes from James Musteller, and the question is: as the leaders of the future progress through their careers, working hand in hand with AI-enabled decision-making at each stage of their development, do you foresee any risk that these individuals will be overly reliant upon the decisions suggested by AI? Or put another way, if you've always had AI-enabled support available to help you make better decisions, how can you objectively recognize that these are, in fact, the optimal courses of action?
So if it's okay, I'll start with that one. So, there's a yin and yang to that. I think, first of all, the people entering the service today and will enter tomorrow are digital natives, and they're very comfortable with using AI and machine learning. So that's on the good side. On the bad side, to just directly address that question, I think it's worth paying attention to how much AI and machine learning have infiltrated our lives already. Things like when you start to respond to an email, the words are suggested, so you don't have to type the words yourself. We found an example where one insurance giant, MetLife, the person who speaks with the customer service rep, will have a little icon appear in the lower right-hand corner of his screen. And if he's sounding too sleepy or not paying attention, a cup of coffee will appear. And if he's not being empathetic enough with the customer, then a little heart will appear, et cetera, et cetera. In Amazon warehouses, now with the technology that exists, the Amazon worker doesn't have to search for the bin to put the object in that comes on a conveyor belt. The bin lights up, and then basically the Amazon worker is playing an advanced game of whack-a-mole. And probably more perniciously, most of us use GPS. We probably couldn't navigate without it. And if you think about what GPS is doing to us, it's making us the robot to take the GPS system to where it wants to go. So again, just some common examples, and the reason I give those is that I think our young people coming up who will enter the military are becoming so dependent on AI that they don't think to look inside the black box. They're actually too trusting. Sam, do you want to continue with that one?
Well, I would say that I worry about exactly what the questioner is asking, but I take a different tact on that. If we allow that, then there's a problem. If we allow someone, say, ASW watch officer on a ship, to prosecute a submarine, to use the AI system without knowing how to prosecute the submarine target, without having to rely on AI, then we're making a mistake, because we're putting a non-professional and throwing a system at it. You know, some years ago when the Naval Academy decided it was going to teach midshipmen celestial navigation, I just shook my head. You know, one thing the CO always knows on his ship is that in the moment of crisis, your most sophisticated system will probably fail you. Someone did the wrong maintenance, something happened. And so you have to have workarounds and fallbacks and think through the problem in a way. So I fear what you're asking. I hope it doesn't happen. What the excuse for celestial navigation was, oh, well, there's not enough time. We've got other things to teach. And if you send someone out who does not know the basics and you say, this is an AI system, it will help you, then you're going to get that reliance. And that's something that we need a dialogue on. I haven't, something that, thanks for the question, because it sparked something in me to want to investigate and do some writing on. Both George and I think best in prose. That's how I work out problems in my head. And George does the same. So that's something that we need to investigate, because that could be a problem. But the decision makers, those who create the schoolhouse, the curriculum, really need to keep that in mind and not just assume. I mean, it's a problem. Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Thank you both. Our next question comes from the Director of SMA, Mr. Tangredi. And the question is, I'm not aware of any of our major or minor wargame centers building AI or machine learning into wargame and scenario designs. It seems that we should be simulating and testing these features in a more disciplined and routine fashion to gain new insights as the capabilities evolve and informed decisions on policy and execution are required. Can you provide your thoughts on this?
I'll start off by telling you that it's the same concern that was expressed to me a number of times by former CNO Admiral John Richardson, because he kept talking about, he says, what I would really like is iterative gaming in which we use some of the systems to assist us playing this game over and over and over to see if there might be different outcomes. Now, Naval War College is known for its gaming. You know, it practically invented the classic military focus on wargaming back in 1910 or whenever McCarty Little started getting everybody to wargame. But basically, they look at the game as a teaching tool. It is giving the experience of the staffs, the combatant commander or whatever staffs that come in and play the game on how to think through these problems. So they're not looking for the solutions per se. But so that frustrated Admiral Richardson a lot. And we're taking a look at it, but basically, some of the people said, well, Admiral, give us another $20 million and maybe we can approach that. This stuff isn't cheap. Now, I can tell you at the Center for, at the Cyber and Innovation Policy Center there at Institute at Naval War College, trying to put cyber and AI into war games. Working on it actively right now, but we're not there. There's two pieces. One, how to use AI as a assist in the wargaming, but two, how to make the players aware, and particularly looking at future scenarios, how AI might help them so that they can incorporate them into their whole mental process of decision making during the game. Those are the two different aspects that are being looked at. We're in our infancy. There might be, defense industry people that are doing that right now. I'm not aware of it, mostly because my focus has been on Navy, and we haven't done a lot of that. I'm sure that RAND might be taking a look at that, at doing that seriously. But yeah, we're aware of the problem. Some people are working on it. We're not there yet. It's going to require resources, and resources are always scarce.
Just piling on a bit, Todd. It's a great question, and I think your point is we should do that. And as Sam indicated, it's hard, but I think we're leaning into doing that. I'll give you one small example, though, of the advantage of inserting technologies into war games is to not just quantify how much better those technologies could do, but to get the operators enthused about them. So in 2001, we had a technology at our lab called Knowledge Wall, Knowledge Web, and we got that instantiated in Global War Game 2001 at the Naval War College. It basically helped the operational commander have a better visualization and make decisions. He got so enthused about that system. He was a carrier strike group commander. He twisted some arms and got that system installed on his flagship USS Kitty Hawk. USS Kitty Hawk then went to Operation Enduring Freedom, and that technology helped him make better decisions. So not waving the flag for the lab, but saying one of the benefits of doing what you suggest is to get operators knowledgeable about that technology and then enthused about using it in their platforms, systems, sensors, and weapons. Over.
All right, thank you both. So we have 6 minutes and 3 remaining questions. So let's do a bit of a rapid fire here. So this first question comes from D. Phillips from DITRA. And the question is, what is your estimation of the number of AI skilled persons that we have in the US military, i.e. active duty, reserve, civilian, contractor? And how do you suggest that the US government significantly increases this number?
So I'll begin if that's okay. I don't know the number, but I will tell you that in the 756-page final report of the National Security Commission on AI, they recommend setting up an AI service academy, much like the military service academies, that trains people in those technologies to then serve either in uniform or as a military civilian. So I think the need to do that is recognized, but I can't give you a number of people serving today. Sam?
Not enough. But there's 2 different categories. There are AI designers and then AI users. I think it'd be easy for us to, not easy, but it is a reasonable prospect of training those people who know enough about AI that they can use it effectively and knowledgeable enough that they can see how the decisions are made. The actual designers, those are in short supply. What would I do? I would draft them. But bearing that, except for that, some sort of program where we will pay your 4 years of college or your 6 years, including grad school. You owe us so many years. That seems to be the only way to do it, other than saying if you're an AI designer, you need to register for a new draft. No, it's tough. We can't pay them enough. We have to rely on patriotism. We do get people from the software community, from the cyber community, who do enter the services as for patriotic means, but no, we can't. We're going to have to do something. I don't know if Service Academy role. I would think that it would be easier to just pay college, pay their college expense. We pay your college debt. You owe us 3 years or 4 years, and maybe they'll like it and stay.
All right, thank you. Our next question comes from Arthur Huber, and this question is, do you think that a joint experimental campaign or periodic forum would be useful to stress and evaluate AI or autonomy and the nature of its application in weapons systems and combat environments? While I observe that the experiments are going on in a piecemeal fashion, I don't see these evolutions going on in a systematic or standardized way.
I'll take that first. No. Oh, why I say no is this. We need an AI success in the services somewhere before we standardize anything. And there hasn't been. Not yet. There's been small things. I go back to what George briefed you on Triton. We need to have a good success story that we can say, this is how it worked. To gather the lessons learned to figure out how to standardize it. Now, I'm all for dialogue. Let's have a dialogue, but I don't think it's going to get anywhere until we have some lessons learned on how do you insert AI to the program to this sort of benefit. And people are working on it, but I don't see us there yet that we have the lessons on how to do it that we can really discuss and standardize. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I know we've got one more question, so I'll just defer and we'll take the next question, Nicole. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Our last question comes from Todd. And this question is, have you seen a lot of AI applications based on natural systems? I'm thinking about insects, bird flocks, and how their organizational rules may inform swarming algorithms in aerial and ground autonomous systems.
So Todd, great question. Thanks for asking it. The Naval Postgraduate School is doing some cutting edge work with airborne swarms versus swarms, and it's very, very cutting edge. I think the other services are doing something similar, but it's 50 aircraft versus 50 aircraft. This was, oh, by the way, on a CBS 60 Minutes show back in 2017 with the SCO director, Will Roper. But having said that, I think there's a danger there in focusing on those, because people look at that and they go, wow, that's magic. And they're looking for that big win, swarm versus some of the things that we recommended, the low hanging fruit with things like Triton and decision making. So that's our concern, is you see these magical things going on and go, wow, we're there. Well, we're not there. It's a one-time experiment. So Sam?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. When I say, a success story, I'm talking about at the level that George and I have been talking about. I know there's a contest between the Naval Academy, West Point, and Air Force Academy on designing on the swarm. I forget all the details, but there has been a contest handing on that. And The problem with some of the approaches is we tend to fixate it on the current buzzwords. So swarm was a hot thing about a year ago or 2 years ago, and people don't talk swarm that much anymore. That's why George, and in particular, is trying to get their focus on, you know, derogatorily, we call them low-hanging fruit, but on these other simple ways. And if we could take the small steps, then that will lead eventually to the big steps. This isn't going to happen soon. You know, when I talk Navy programs, you know, a lot of people talking about, well, the fleet in 2035, 2045, it'll have, you know, unmanned systems, half unmanned systems. No, it won't. Fleet in 2060 might, but it's going to take a lot of work. It doesn't seem, engineering's hard, you know. I mean, I use this example when people talk about, well, you know, we're at that ramp up where we have exponential increase in technology, our capabilities, we're moving so fast and stuff. That's true in the commercial sector where you're going to make a lot of profit. You know, people will pour investment money into something that they can make a 40% profit in. So yeah, but when it comes to military applications, that's a whole different thing. Let's look at something like railgun. Railgun has had so many IOCs. You know, it's going to be in the fleet tomorrow, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not faulting them. I want to put this in perspective. I ask people when I talk about those emerging technologies and how they develop. I said, you know, when was the concept of railgun patented? You know, when did someone patent the concept of putting two electromagnetic charges going up parallel paths, being able to create energy enough to propel a projectile, and people wonder, and I said, well, it's 100 years old. That patent was issued in 1922. It's almost 100 years old, and it's taken us that long. That the technology wasn't there when someone conceived of it. This stuff is hard. It's not, you know, there's not going to be the robots tomorrow. But what we can do is take the small steps, and we haven't quite organized enough to do the small steps. And one of the reasons is the services need to own this. You know, I know you're J39 and you're the Joint Staff and you love Joint, but just having the J doesn't, I mean, that's a prod, but the services themselves have to own this. They have to be the ones that convince AI is going to help them. Joint dialogue and stuff, no, that's not going to do. And it's got to work even at the program manager level to say, this will improve the system that I am responsible for. And mandates or no, it's going to have to be at that level.
Well, that is a great note to end on. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to attend today's brief. And thank you, Captain Tangredi, and thank you, Captain Galdorisi, for taking the time to present today. If you could both stay online, I'm going to shut down the live event, but we'll offer our thanks behind the scenes. But thank you, everyone, and have a great day.